My name is Paige Bronk. I work for the town of Groton Economic and Community Development. We're all fairly passionate about moving the needle in Groton and making positive change. It's taken, a while for things to be as they are in Groton. People are always reminding me of the glory days, the Miracle Mile and all of that. I would just say, imagine how that has changed and where we're at today. It takes time to actually try to bring it back to those times as well. People have told me stories about, like this location, the Benny's, or when are you going to bring back the movie theater? I had my first date at the movie theater. When are you going to bring this back, that back? Well, I can't promise we're going to bring those back, but what I can talk about is positive change moving forward. And I think that's what we've been trying to do for a number of years. Outside of Groton, Groton hasn't always been on the map, and we have focused on trying to put it on the map and attracting certain investors. We do our marketing, our promotions, and we try to work with experts as well in trying to deal with redevelopment. So today, well, let me back up. Last summer, we did a presentation with Nava Retail, and it dealt with retail. We had a pretty good crowd, although I think today is larger. And we had a lot of Q&A. We'll offer that opportunity after today's presentation as well. We continue to work with Nava Retail. Casey Kidd is here. He works nationwide in all states, and he does serve Groton's interest as well in trying to help us in attracting certain investors. This year, we discussed really the main theme was solving the redevelopment or development puzzle. Some of these properties in Groton have been in a similar form for quite a while, and people may wonder, well, why is that? How come we don't get another store that I want? We hear, what's the number one thing people want? People say, I want a Trader Joe's. How do we get those types of businesses? Well, at the same time, Groton's population has been declining. And I'm sure people are tired of me saying this, but 82% of our jobs are held by commuters. So people make money, they leave, they don't necessarily reinvest and spend the money in Groton. That's a challenge for us. So this year, we're focusing on redevelopment. And the theme, I think many of you saw the flyer was solving the development puzzle. We did not want to hold a meeting in a traditional government building. We wanted you to look around and see what some of these properties look like. And I think many of you had shopped at Benny's, and you have great memories. It could be, they had the best beach chairs here, or, all kinds of things like that. And retail nationwide has definitely taken a hit. You've seen stories about Bed Bath & Beyond, Christmas Tree Shop. The list really goes on. It's shrinking, and it's a really tough environment. We are not here today, I want to be crystal clear, to showcase this property. We're not here to talk about Benny's. We're here to talk about redevelopment in Groton as a whole. What the trends are nationwide, how Connecticut is challenged, Groton is challenged, more importantly, how we're going to convert some of those challenges and constraints to opportunities. What can we do locally and make a difference for our future? So that's really what the conversation is going to be about. Casey Kidd from Nava Retail will go through a presentation. We will also have an opportunity at the end for Q&A, which is really important. We want to hear what your questions are, and Casey will have an opportunity to respond, and I will respond at the same time. I do want to thank, as I said, the general public, but also members of the town council, also members of the RTM. And also we have town staff here as well. Lastly, thank you to Chris Regan for allowing us to have this meeting at this venue. At this point in time, I think I'll turn it over to Casey, and then, as I said, we'll have a Q&A at the tail end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paige. When we started talking about putting all this together, one of the first things that we talked about it for, I guess, a few days, and then tried to figure out a title. And Sam was really instrumental in coming up with this title because of all the things that we had talked about. And what we all kind of agreed on is that we wanted to bring back vitality to Groton. Having worked in over 400 cities, I've seen a lot of very prosperous cities. I've seen a lot of cities that at one point in time were just the bee's knees, and then they sit completely vacant. And it's not uncommon for us, especially as we're hired, to be working in some of these that are completely vacant. And it's difficult because it's almost like a beating heart. If it stops, you get so much time before there's just nothing that you can do to restart that beating heart. But to give you a little bit of background on me, I'm originally from North Mississippi in a small town called Pontotoc. Grew up there. I ended up moving to Boston for college and then moved back down to the Mississippi, Memphis area. I ended up working for what is now one of our competitors and worked there for about 4 years before starting this about 8 years ago. Over the past 12 years, I've seen a lot of things, I guess, change throughout our industry and retail and just even consumer spending. We have 2 offices. We have one in Memphis, one in Fort Worth. I opened the Fort Worth office about three and a half years ago. One thing to keep in mind, retail is not dying, it is evolving. Consumer spending is at an all-time high. That's the reason for a lot of the inflation issues that we see, is the fact that consumers just never stop spending money. And my age group and age groups below are definitely responsible for that. Even during COVID, online shopping was just crazy. They couldn't deliver products fast enough. So let's take a step back a long, long time ago, nearly 100 years ago, to 1927. This here is a Sears and Roebuck fulfillment center. And so just keep this image in mind, because what we're going to do is we're going to go through the years, each decade, looking at Sears as a company. In the 1930s, it looked a little bit like this. 40s come along, cars get a little bit more abundant. Here's the 60s. Finally got a color image. 80s, this is where it really kind of at its peak. And this is the Sears I remember. I just turned 32, so 1991 on, I bought a lot of jeans at Sears. My parents did. But then the 2010s come around, and this is the Sears as we know it today. So around 2015, that Sears and Roebuck fulfillment center that I showed you earlier looks something like this. This is in Memphis, Tennessee, just right down the road from our office there. There's not a lot of vitality in that image there. I don't know how well y'all can see it, but it was vacant, I think, for just shy of 30 years. And in 2017, someone came along. I think it was a developer out of Atlanta. They did the same thing in Atlanta, which is called the Ponce City Market. But in Memphis, they built what they call the Crosstown Concourse. And so I guess what I wanted you to see here is that going all the way from 1927 to this dilapidated building where it was once kind of like an Amazon fulfillment center for a mail order catalog is once again thriving. And that to me is pretty cool, because as retail evolves, towns must also evolve. And we saw through that transition between the 1930s all the way to as it sits today, there was a lot of people that saw that they must also evolve in order to save what they really cared about, and that was this part of Memphis and ultimately this fulfillment center. So when we look at Groton over the years, population pretty steady up until everything just starts taking off all the way until the 1990s. And that was pretty much the peak. And ever since then, that's been the trend. Obviously, as y'all very well know, it takes people to spend money to keep these retail establishments in business. And if people aren't here to spend money, then we have an issue. This is zoomed in a little bit further, and it gets even more dramatic the more that you zoom in just from the last peak, from the truly the top. The 1990, I think, or 1991, somewhere around there, was truly the peak, and then what's happened since then. And one thing to keep in mind is that this is the total population, the people living in Groton, but that's not necessarily to say that there aren't people here, and that's something we'll touch on a little bit later. But what we did is a projection in 2050 here. If over the past 10 years that trend continues, this will be the population in 2050. It's losing about 5,200 people, 13%. And population had not been that low since 1963. I like this album cover. I like this album. Times they are a-changing, and they're definitely changing for us as we do a lot of development consulting. And so every day that we're in our offices, we're trying to figure out things that we might even not have the answers to. And it's because this industry just changes so quickly. And then lo and behold, COVID just changed everything. Not even just our industry, it changed everything. I saw this just last week. This is I don't know if y'all have heard of it, but it's a big gas station franchise or chain in Texas, and now they're building outside of Texas, but they build these enormous gas stations that are about 70,000 square feet, and they literally carry everything. But some of their rates that they're advertising for their general managers, $225,000 a year. I promise you, they weren't paying people $225,000 to manage a gas station before COVID. Offices really changed throughout COVID. This is what the typical office looks like now. Pretty crazy. So I wanted to show kind of some of the stats here. And so what you'll see here, this is office vacancy. And so the last thing you want to see in any trend if you're in real estate is vacancy. And so the forecast, as you see this line here, is that it's trending up. Market rents are trending down. Not a great day for someone that owns a lot of office space. Cap rates are going up. And just so you know, cap rates, if you're not familiar, it's just a measure of an investor's expected yield from an investment, in our case, in real estate. So then we looked at multifamily. This is something that was really unique here because I think, in my opinion, in looking at the numbers, it's hard to adjudicate what the market truly is doing because I don't think the need for multifamily is completely met here. One thing I've noticed about my generation, the generation below me, is the fact that a lot of us don't own homes anymore. And that's something that I have rental properties in Mississippi, and every year the average age of my tenants goes up. And so that's just it's becoming a very common trend all across America, and we work in 30 states, and so I see it kind of across the board, and there's a lot of people that need rentable living quarters. So then we look at retail, and this is where we really focus, which we've worked across all three of these asset classes, but retail is kind of where it's kind of our bread and butter. Vacancy's low. It's trending up, but it's definitely been more vacant. And hopefully that's a sign that we're changing some of this. This is the part that you have to keep in mind is really tricky, and I'll explain a little bit more here in a second. But it all goes back to what can you build something for and what can you lease it back for. That's really how all this works. You don't want to really see cap rates rising, market rents lowering. Now, I don't know if y'all read the news earlier, but even just today, another 25 basis points. And so that's something you got to keep in mind really affects this whole equation, this whole puzzle. I like the idea of calling it a puzzle because it really is, if you can solve it, you can make a lot of money. But if you can't solve the puzzle, nobody's happy. So just keep in mind there's not one factor that makes or breaks a deal, but all these factors coming in together ultimately makes or breaks a deal. So to break it down to its simplest form, it usually requires land. Buildings sit on land. It might be a building already on some land. It might be just some vacant land. It requires land, and then you add a building to it, and you get cost. Pretty easy to understand, right? So from that cost, you have to make back some money. So then you charge rent. So you take your rent, you subtract your costs, you get profit. Hopefully. We call this the developer squeeze. And so that difference there is where the developer is hoping to squeeze out their investment, squeeze out that profit so that they can justify spending the money and the capital that's going to take in order to erect a structure or to lease it back to a tenant. This really goes back to having the right product. And when I say product, I'm not talking about walking into a store and buying a beach chair, as we talked about earlier. Real estate itself is the right product, or it requires that you have the right product. So we treat real estate as a product. Certain retailers care about their product and what storefront they're going into, where they're going into. And so having the right product really makes the difference when it comes to attracting retailers. And I'll tell you, today, I don't know that Groton has enough of the right product. It has product, but I don't know it has the right product. So a lot of what I want to focus in on is getting Groton the right product so that we're bringing what the retailers want, the places that they want to be, and capitalizing on these people that are here. So when we look at development, obviously one of the things that we hear all the time is that, we'll get it done. It should have been done yesterday. I told Paige, we were talking earlier, if there was one thing to understand about retail development and development in general, it's that it takes time. I said if you walked away, you didn't know anything else about development after tonight, just know it takes time. There's a lot of things that can delay projects. There's a lot of things that can give developers pause or investors pause. And that's just the nature of the business that we're in. We deal with it daily. So here are 5 things that can really speed up development. Because if it takes time, how do we do it faster? How do we do it more effectively? Number 1, knowing your consumers. Know who's going to be in your establishment. And even just people that live here. Maybe not people that are associated with development or are part of this development process, but just knowing who is Groton selling to. And that's where our company does come in, and we help quite a bit. And we do so via these trade areas. So what we're doing here is we're analyzing the people that are in the market. Not people that live here, but people that are here spending dollars. I don't know why they're here. I am sure that we could trace back the data to find out why, but honestly, really what we care about is just that they're spending money or that they can spend money. So this is just kind of seeing it. We've been working, this is starting our 4th year with Groton, and we're seeing here over the years how this trade area changes. And this is the most recent. And honestly, it changes every day. We use cell phones to get this data. We track the GPS in cell phones. Once we see them in a retail establishment here, we track them. And this equates to about 70,000 people that are frequently shopping in Groton. Now, for all intents and purposes, they could be employees at EB, or they could be at Pfizer, or they could be in the Navy. But they're here. So that's where we have an opportunity to capitalize. And this is how much opportunity we have to capitalize on. Over $400 million in total retail opportunity. That means that these $410 million went somewhere else. There was spending in Groton. We have an amount that was spent in Groton, but this is the amount not spent in Groton. That's the one that I like to focus on, is the one, all right, if it wasn't spent here, why did they leave to go somewhere else? Because that's the opportunity. Just in grocery alone, $30 million. Some of the grocers that, smaller format grocers that we deal with, they would be happy with half of this. So that would almost imply that you could build 2 here and only break even as far as capturing the opportunity. For restaurants, nearly $17 million spent elsewhere. A lot of people left the market to go eat somewhere else. That's the part that we want to change, because that ultimately represents dollars that were not collected here. The town of Groton is paying to service individuals that are here but leaving to go somewhere else and spend money elsewhere. Number 2, have a realistic plan for new development. Not just have a plan, but have a realistic plan. I added that after we used this presentation about 20 or 30 times, and I think I was noticing a trend that a lot of cities and towns have plans, but some of them are not realistic. What we like to focus in on is the realistic plan. What can we do over the next 12 months? What is an achievable goal, and how do we accomplish that over the next 12 months? We also need the town to be connected with its stakeholders, and that's why you're all here tonight. Because the one thing that I like to see when I do these presentations, and I do them almost every week, I like to see chairs full, because that shows me that the people of the town are engaged. Y'all care. If I was talking to 3 people right now, I would say, they're having some engagement issues, but we have people standing at the back. That's pretty cool to me. That shows that the town does care about the future of Groton, and that's why I'm here. Having the funds that are available for needed infrastructure and possible incentives. I say possible. When it comes to incentives, and I teach classes on incentives all across the U.S., it's not our first tool out of the toolbox. We're not saying, hey, the first step of the development process is the city writes them a check. But you have to understand, going back to the very simple equation I showed you, if a developer gets to the end and that squeeze doesn't make sense for them, they're not going to spend the money and they're not going to build the development. And so, one of the things that with TIF financing, they use the but-for test. And then basically the but-for test is the development would not happen if not but for the use of this incentive. And so just keep that in mind, because there might be situations in which this has to be the way that we go, because the numbers just don't work otherwise. The way that when I do this, the class that I do on incentives, I start off with the conservation of energy. Can't be created, can't be destroyed. So what that leaves for you is basically the same for risk. So risk is just inherent in development. Building buildings on land and trying to lease it back to a tenant is risky. So what we hope to do with incentives is to take some of this risk off the developers. Now, obviously, not all the risk, and this is a shopping center that's completely vacant here. This is in southern Alabama. And number 5, make things easy. I promise you, if there's one consistent thing about retail over the past 12 years, it's that they always take the path of least resistance. That is just the way things work. Retailers like easy deals. They like a deal that doesn't take them 36 months to put together. They like to be able to sign a lease that they feel comfortable signing and do it as quickly as possible, because the quicker they can do that, the quicker they can get the cash register open and they can start making back that money, because that's what they care about. So keep in mind, you don't want to be all that grass in the side. Also keep in mind that market demand drives expansion. What this means, and this came up last year when we were having a meeting similar to this, someone asked, well, we keep getting chicken restaurants. Why do we keep getting chicken restaurants? And my response to that was, because you keep eating chicken. When you stop eating chicken, they'll stop building chicken restaurants. It's all supply and demand. So as long as you keep demanding it, they'll keep supplying it. I don't want any of this to be doom, gloom, and make you wary. There's a lot of positives here and things that I have witnessed firsthand since I ever stepped foot in Groton about 4 years ago. Mystic being number 1. Mystic's a really cool place. I think in the state of Connecticut, Mystic blows my mind every day, and I get to travel all across the U.S. for a living. We were there last night. I think that there's enough attention and draw to this area that y'all have. You have the spotlight. It's just time to take it. And so Mystic obviously really impressed me, and I think there's a way in which to really capitalize on the traffic that draws, even to other parts of Groton, like downtown. You have EB. You have guaranteed people here every day that are going to have to eat lunch, that are probably going to have to pick up something from the store on the way home. They're going to have to go and grab some groceries, or they're going to have to go and pick up this or that. EB is something y'all definitely can capitalize on. You got the Navy here. I think what this really just represents is there's a lot of people here already. One of the things that I think comes up in a lot of these types of meetings is, well, our population just isn't high enough. No, it is. For a lot of these retailers that we're actively pursuing, population's there. The trade area represents that the population's there. 70,000 people, of which I'm sure plenty of these work for EB, Pfizer. They're here. So with that, it's time to capitalize on that. And one of the analogies that we kind of thought through for this, it's almost like having a really good crop. So you've grown all this grain, or I think this is soybeans. I can't really see from here, but I think it's soybeans. You got this really beautiful field full of soybeans. Now it's just time to harvest it. So rather than just sitting there looking at it, I want to get out there and start picking these soybeans. There's only two ways for a government entity to increase their revenue. One is to raise taxes, and nobody likes that. I, for one, do not like that. If you like raising taxes, then come see me afterwards. But doing this for 12 years, I've yet to meet anybody that likes their taxes raised. The other one is to bring in more people to pay taxes. Well, businesses pay taxes. So with this, we're trying to find more businesses for Groton that fit the needs of the consumers that are here today. We know there's probably going to be more consumers that are coming this way, but for the ones that are here today, meeting their needs, bringing in more businesses to remit tax revenue to the town so that y'all can provide them with the best services the town can. And with that, I'll ask if y'all have any questions.
Thank you, Casey, for the presentation. It's really important to us that we allow some Q&A with the public. And before I forget, we do have a sign-in sheet. We are encouraging people to sign in if you can and provide your email just so we know who is here. We also, if you care to, will add you to the Explore More Groton website for future notifications. So I will walk around and actually entertain any questions. If you wouldn't mind, raise your hand and speak clearly into the microphone. Thank you.
This is just a qualification and a question. I'm not sure, the 403 million, did that represent sales that went outside of Groton, or what is the total sales generated in Groton? And I'm assuming you're talking about retail sales. So could you just put some color around that big number?
Yeah, so, and I'm trying to pull this from memory, but the number we look at is the opportunity, and that is basically taking the demand, meaning the total amount that was spent by the consumers, not the total amount that was spent by the people that live in Groton, but the total 70,000 people that you saw. We know how much money they spent on retail goods and services, and then subtracting out what Groton had. And I believe the total spend was somewhere around $1 billion. And so they've spent, say, give or take, $600 million in Groton, but there is $400 million that they also spent. But that wasn't here. That was not within the town limits of Groton. That went somewhere else.
Did you need a follow-up question at all?
When you say, okay, but I still don't understand. When you say somewhere else, is it another geography? And if so, how did you measure what geography that went to? I just don't understand the numbers.
So what happens is I assume most people in this room have a cell phone. We know where you are when you make a purchase. And so when we look at that cell phone, we watch it drive right across the town limits. Or maybe it went all the way to Warwick. But it went somewhere that was not here. And that's the part that we care the most about, is the fact that it was not spent here. As soon as you geographically went across that town limit line, that purchase was no longer made in the town of Groton. And that's the part that we're looking to change, because there's a lot of dollars that could be spent here, they're just not. We're not meeting the consumer's needs. We're not providing them the things they ultimately want right here, so they're going somewhere else to get them. One thing that is consistent in this industry is that people love to spend money, and they're going to get the goods and services they want. If you decide for yourself that you want a new pair of Adidas tennis shoes, you're going to get them. It really doesn't matter if they're in Groton or not. You're going to go on Amazon, you're going to drive down the road, you're going to go and buy those shoes. That part doesn't typically change. What does change, and what we can change, is where those tennis shoes are purchased. And what we're trying to do is get those tennis shoes purchased right here in Groton.
Back here.
Thank you. Question regarding your analogy about the chicken, right? Like, why do we keep getting chicken restaurants? Because you keep eating more chicken. So we don't want any more chicken restaurants. we want to go and like buy food at different types of stores, right? Like Trader Joe's, like Whole Foods. Just an example. We want different kinds of restaurants. But if you're saying the only way you get them is if you buy them, the question is kind of this catch-22. How do you get those restaurants here so we can actually spend our money there? How do you get something other than chicken, right? That's what we need to know, right? How do you get something else here that we don't currently have is, I think, what we want to know.
You know, this same question came up I think about 3 or 4 months ago when we were in Ohio doing a very similar event like this. And I know it's not the most ideal answer, but the answer to that question is you stop leaving. Stop leaving Groton. Right. But if you were all here and you all stayed here, there wouldn't be $400 million that left. And so I know it's not ideal sometimes to buy all your goods and services and spend all your dollars here, but if at all possible, stop driving across the town limits and getting something somewhere else. There was the lady that had asked that question in Ohio. I asked her, about the grocery store, and this was after the event was over, but I asked her about, where she bought her groceries. And she named every other town around there except for the one that she was in. And I asked her, I said, I forget the name of the grocery store there, but I was like, well, why don't you shop at such and such grocery store? She's like, oh, I don't shop there. I was like, well, to illustrate the point of the question that you asked earlier, that is the problem. As soon as you stop, because these retailers, they look at store sales. We have the sales data. When they see an underperforming store, they're like, no, that's not a market for us. So it really starts with the people in this room today, and I can do, and Paige as well, do the best job we possibly can, but it really falls back onto the consumer spending money. And if you go somewhere else and you spend that money, then they're looking at the store sales and saying, well, this is kind of a marginal market for us. Go ahead.
Hi, I just want to say that Home Goods and other places like that, Trader Joe's and whatever the other store is that everybody loves, they do their homework as well, and they only go to places where geographically there's going to be a lot of people there who are going to spend the money there. What I would like to see addressed in Groton, if you look at Waterford and New London and some area towns, even Ledyard, they're putting apartment buildings up. And I'm not an advocate of apartments, but if you want people to spend money in Groton, we need more housing in Groton. We need more, and I'm not saying low-income housing, affordable housing. In 1987, I bought a 3-bedroom ranch for $85,000. I could probably sell it anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000 because of the bidding war. But where am I gonna go?
Right.
I, at this point in time, still want to own a home. I don't want to rent a home. So I think Groton needs to jump on the bandwagon of having affordable, reasonably priced homes that people can buy and make a life and make a family here. That's exactly what we did. We've lived here, owning our home, 36 years. So I've seen EB collapse. When EB collapsed, our saving grace was Foxwoods, because people could go get a job at Foxwoods.
Right.
Now EB's gearing up again. We need to capitalize on EB gearing up, and we need housing. And
Well,
if you have housing, the businesses will come.
Well, the market speaks for itself. When we have 70,000 people that are here and only 40,000 people that live here, there's definitely a difference in those two numbers. And so one trend that we're seeing all across the U.S. is the development of a lot of multifamily housing. Even a project that we're actively working on in California, it was actually done with affordable housing dollars, the way that they were able to make the rents and all the costs worth their while in this community was to add in those affordable housing dollars. And so it wasn't their primary objective, but at the same time, by using those funding sources from the state, they were able to alleviate some of their financial risk and burden to make that development work. And again, that's kind of what it all boils down to. The reason you're seeing so much multifamily developed right now is because, number one, we kind of underbuilt in 2007, 2008, or we've underbuilt since then because of all the things that happened in 2007, 2008. But then also, we're not buying houses anymore. We're renting, and so that's where, as we bring in more that are my age, and I know this is something that Pfizer and EB are actively working on, you're going to need that multifamily component. But regardless of all of that, the people are here. The problem is they're just leaving at night and going somewhere else. And so, stopping that outflow of people, I think, is a pretty big objective as well.
Thank you. I can hold it. I got it. I feel more comfortable to move around.
I got it.
Oh, okay. All right. You can hold it. All right. So for me, I guess there's a lot of talk. I appreciate your presentation, but the presentation to me was more fact-driven, which most of us that are from here, have been here a long time, know. I know that Mystic's a great spot. Everything in the presentation is what I know. What I didn't hear is what do we do? And what I did hear, I heard Patrice Kronatowski speak about, how do we stop that? And that's a great comment that she made, because for one, I shop at Whole Foods, I shop at Trader Joe's, and I shop at organic food stores like in New London at Fiddleheads. I can't stop going there because there's no other option here. So I can't be a change in that. That's one.
There's grocery stores here.
Two, that don't have the products though. Two, we say that there's a decline in the amount of people living here, but we want to build more apartments. I will say, from having a young son who's in the Navy right now, and I've had friends, children come in for interviews at EB, they don't stay here because as soon as they go down Thames Street, they don't see anything. They drive through the Groton, they don't see anything. So if they live here, they choose Mystic or the Stonington side of Mystic, and they don't pick here because there's nothing here. So we could build more, but they're looking for a nightlife. They're looking for a walkable district. They're looking for a community where they can move around, and the folks that are here are looking for affordable incomes and ways to downsize and live here comfortably. But what we don't have is the attractability. When you get off that highway at the exit, it doesn't look attractive. It doesn't look like, wow, I got that interview and now I'm going to stay at EB. They get the interview and they go, I'm going to East Line, I'm going to Guilford, I'm going to Westerly. So we got to find a way, and that's what I was hoping this presentation would be more geared for us. How do we, not just us staying here and shopping and suffering through because I need my Fiddleheads that has products that they don't have here, is how do we build something and attract people in a way that we weren't before. I'm nervous about building a ton of infrastructure that's not affordable housing, just hoping that EB will stay here. And as it was stated, as a person who lived here, my friend's parents were laid off in the early 80s and 90s from EB at 18 and 20 years old. Pfizer laid off. Foxwoods has laid off, and then there was threats in Groton several times about closing the naval base altogether. So we've had a lot of threats. We have to find ways to thrive without that, and that's where I think our missing link is. We can't pop when it's hot and hope to thrive when it goes down. We got to find something that sets us apart and move forward. And I think, how do we engage our developments on Thames Street and property owners? Like, for example, this strip here that's been vacant. We have vacant strips across the street, Thames Street. We need our owners of our properties to do something with their properties. And that is something of concern. So that's what I want to hear, is solutions to take what we have and figure out ways to turn it into a marketable place where people desire to want to stay. The jobs may be here, but people are not choosing to buy a house here, and that's the question. But your information is correct, and I appreciate it, but that is like the baseline of what we all know, and we're looking for how do we change that. So those are my questions. How do you retain someone when they get off the highway and I say, I'm shopping here because I'm trying to keep the place, trying to make it develop, I'm suffering through, I'm only shopping in Groton, I'm doing my part, and people get here and they're like, this is a ghost town. It ain't gonna work. There's gotta be a better plan than that. Thanks, that's my question.
Well, I think there's a lot of parts in that. So starting off, the reason it's fact-driven is I kind of want to make sure that we're all on the same page of where we are today. 10 years ago, I got my pilot's license, and one of the first things I do when we start up and put in the GPS, you have to start with your origin, because there's no point in even putting the destination if the GPS doesn't know where you are. And so for Groton, I want to kind of let y'all know, here's where you are, but I think it's also important to understand what this retail site selection process is and what we do all day. Because there's some mystique behind that, I feel like, because it's something that you don't read a lot of articles about retail site selection. At least I haven't seen a lot. I've done work for many Fortune 300 companies, even outside of our government consulting business, just helping them with site selection. Talking about attractiveness and curb appeal, that doesn't even come into play until so much further down the pipeline. Some of the things that we're working on today, they're not even going to get in the car and drive to Groton until they feel at least X amount confident that they're going to be able to make a deal here. And so that has to precede them getting in the car. Now, curb appeal and all of that matters, but at the same time, if I can't get them into the car and get them to drive here and see the market for themselves, what have we really done? And so the first step is to get them to understand, hey, that there is opportunity here. And that was step one for us, is to surmise, all right, $400 million exists in opportunity retail spending that you could capitalize on. And so what we do as a company, and what Paige and Sam also do, is go to trade shows and advertise that information to potentially interested parties. But that alone is not even going to do the job. It also requires the consumer's buy-in. We have to make sure, number one, that we're picking the right retailers, but then also, if they're looking at the existing store sales here and they're lacking and they're not happy with that, they're probably not going to come here in the first place to even look at the community. So you have to keep in mind, like, put yourselves in the shoes of a real estate manager or site selector, as we call them. If they see that their stores are thriving because you all are going there, they've got your money one way or the other, so why would they expend capital to go and build another store when they're already getting your money? And that was similar to what I spoke on when we were in Ohio, is that it's really kind of, what does the retailer care if they know that they're going to get that dollar? They're already getting that dollar because y'all are driving to go and give it to them. So as long as you keep driving to go give it to them, they're going to say, well, we got that dollar. If they ever see that they're missing a dollar, and that's where a lot of that opportunity data that we have comes in, then they might take a look at a market. And that's how we advertise and ultimately market it to them. But there again, they also look at trends. When they see populations are declining, retail sales are declining, we've got to stop that bleed in some form or fashion. And that may mean that you may not get the $3 chuck. You may have to settle for whatever, Angie's Wine and Spirits has right here in Groton. But that is really the first step. I know that it's not ideal, and I know that it might require some sacrifice on the consumer's end, but at the same time, they're looking at all that information. Until they're seeing something that's increasing, they're not liking the market.
By the way, I do see hands. I'm trying to keep people in order, so keep raising your hands. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. So a lot of good thoughts. I've been all over the map listening to everybody. So I'm at EB. I've been at EB 30 years plus.
Yeah.
We've been in Groton. We've been in Ledyard. We've been in New London. We're back in Mystic for 15 years now on the Groton side of Mystic in Fieldcrest. We hire a lot of engineers at EB. A lot of young people come into EB. Parking is terrible at EB. They are looking for places to live where they don't have to worry about finding parking in the morning. There was a lot of interesting development last year discussed in the Five Corners area, which would feed into what Portia said before about development along Thames Street, where we have a developable area and walking distance to EB, walking not a little bit further from Pfizer, but still reasonable. Get on a bike, people would do that. Get on a scooter, people do that. I see that all the time around EB. So why was, we had a lot of resistance to putting up apartments at Five Corners, where that seemed like a prime opportunity to bring people into the area that would be young, that would be making good money, because I know EB is paying young engineers good money, and we're resistant as a community, it seems, to building there and developing in there. Taking it a little bit further, we were in Sedona last year. Sedona's not too different from here. They've got the downtown area, which is a lot like downtown Mystic. And then they've got the Groton part of Sedona, which is a lot more residential, the people who work in the stores that the tourists are going to. And they're able, they seem to be able to have the mom and pop restaurants. We went to a nice mom and pop restaurant, but they still have some of the other more developed retail that comes in. But I think getting the people here to live here and then bring in, another thought on the living here. New London, by the EB facilities, built two nice looking apartment complexes, one along Bank Street and one down by the Rotaries where EB is. And my take on it is those are actually pricing the salaries that EB is providing. So they're making their own housing for EB unaffordable there. We need to consider that too, that we can't make the housing, the apartment complex is so expensive that the people that they're designed to attract can't live there. They're coming in with student loans. The salary's good, and I think they're being squeezed in wanting to leave, and that makes them not want to live in there, and they'll deal with the parking. But they shouldn't have to. So thank you.
Well, so, it's a constant balance, because as it's all supply and demand. If you increase the supply, then you offset the demand. But if we don't increase the supply and the demand just keeps going up because of adding new jobs at EB or Pfizer or wherever, then obviously developers are going to capitalize on that. They're going to raise rents. If they know that they can fill a property, 100% occupancy at a property for X amount of dollars, that's what the rent's going to be. You're not going to force the hand of a developer or an investor that can say, all right, well, I know it's pricing people out of apartments, but we filled it all up. And so the only way to change that is to build more multifamily, more apartments, so that you have more supply. And that's kind of, it's always a chicken or the egg with us, because, going back to retail, well, if they're getting the dollar no matter what, well, why should they build a store here? What I try to do, and going back to the question earlier, talking about solutions, is to show them, well, maybe you're not getting everybody's dollar. Maybe you're missing some people. Maybe she's willing to drive 40 minutes or however far it is to Whole Foods, but there's some other people where they like Whole Foods, they probably shop there, but they wouldn't be willing to drive 40 minutes or however far it is to go and get that good or service. And so with that, we try to capitalize, in our marketing on the fact that, well, maybe you've left some of the market on the table. And obviously there's opportunities in parts of the market like grocery, but it has to be a balance. It's all going back to, and I hate to keep focusing on the risk, but it really just goes back to, is it worth the risk for them? Would it be worth it, for a grocery store, it could cost you on the upwards of $20 million, $30 million to build that grocery store. Is it worth them expending $20 to $30 million of capital and have no one show up? So, it's not all doom and gloom, but at the same time, it really just relies on people walking through the door and spending money. And if they don't think that enough people will walk through those doors and spend enough money, they're not going to do it. We're over here telling them, hey, but you still should. You should take a look. And hoping that, eventually they'll hop in the car and they'll come see the market and then the charm of Groton and Mystic. But at the same time, if we can't get them to that point, then it's a no-go.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Prella. You know me from many years in politics. Right now on the Beautification Committee with our members are here. We thank them always for planting all that they do, and Councilor Franco and others. I have a letter here. I was just going to try to highlight it from one of my neighbors on Azalea Drive, which is right off the strip here on Route 1, Long Hill Road. And the theme of the letter is a parklet. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is tonight we've heard the themes of parking, parklet, nice development, and preferred housing. So I think if we try to focus, you're the residents, we can drive this forward with the council, the RTM, and the Planning and Zoning Administration, and the other departments. But we have to do it here now. Look at this building, could have been converted possibly, all these empty buildings, to the multifamily village, remember that word too, village housing. But we have to commit to it. We need to commit to the parklets to possibly purchase some of those. Some of the AARP funds, I put a $200,000 grant for trees. Remember that? Trees. We need trees. We need more trees and more trees. It's very important, as Portia said, because if we don't have that, no one's going to come here. In the 50s, people didn't care about that. I'm a lifelong resident. They slapped up the buildings, and they came into Groton, and then they went off to Eastern Point, Groton Long Point, Mumford Cove, Center Groton, wherever, and they didn't have to live right here. Guess what? A lot of us live right here now because that's what we can afford. So affordable housing is absolutely essential, especially like EB right now, because they are going to go out of town to East Lyme, Waterford, whatever. Of course, Waterford's got their own issues with the Crystal Mall situation. So I would like to encourage that. This letter is encouraging. I will turn this into the town manager's office, council, RTM, and planning and zoning. And I'm hopefully that we can act on this. I don't see anybody from the trees organization here tonight. So hopefully this can get incorporated into this plan of development, which goes probably to 95 all the way down to Pequannock Bridge Center Village District. I know Kevin and I have talked a little bit about possibly incorporating what they're going to do with this village atmosphere. This can be done. We have to commit to doing this. This building could be converted. Although I'm looking at it, there's a little rust up here. There's a little not so great peeling paint over there. And if it continues to deteriorate, what are we going to do with it? Is the town going to have to, because the taxes aren't paid, are they going to have to take it over? We don't want the situation that has happened with the school buildings, and then we have to have a huge referendum to try to fix everything that should have been done 25 years ago. We know how that went. Now we're trying to backtrack and convert those buildings. It's a lot of properties in Groton. Here's the thing. We need to take these properties right now that are vacant, work on them, work on this now. Don't put another building anywhere until you fix what you've got right here. These can be converted. I don't know the structural engineering, my time's probably up. The structural engineering on this, I'm getting a little dramatic here because we have to get dramatic. We have to do this. This is our town. We want people to stay here and live here. We want it to be nice. When I walk up Long Hill Road, which I usually take my car, although today was a disaster because of the backed up traffic. Everybody please be nice on the road if you're watching. We need to be nice, and we need to have a village right here. We can do this. Okay.
Well, and so with that, in every city we've ever worked in, our development process starts with redevelopment. And so one thing to keep in mind is we're always looking at what's there today and how do we work with that before we move on to something that is new or something that it would be ground up. And also keep in mind the fact that what we fight in this whole equation is really just risk. And if we could ever alleviate that risk, we could do whatever we wanted. There's a hotel in one of our cities that we work in that's never been profitable, never will be profitable. But they started with a $20 million tax abatement. So when you start with $20 million, it's pretty easy to make a buck. So with that, if you wanted it badly enough, then just remove the risk. Now that might put the burden back onto the town and you as taxpayers to say, hey, look, we can have Whole Foods, but we're going to have to pay for that building. We're going to have to pay for the land, because if it's too risky for them, the only way that you might get is to alleviate that risk.
I've got one in the back here. I have seen several hands in the front, so I'm working my way up there. I think there's about 4 or 5 people in the front.
No worries.
But we've got one right here.
All right, thank you. Ian Thomas, RTM D3. So I just want to appreciate, I do appreciate the presentation. I was in attendance last year, and it seemed very similar. And I guess what we're looking for, or I was looking for, were some ideas, proposals, like how do we move the ball forward? I like the fact that you mentioned redevelopment. I'm a firm believer in adaptive reuse, and I can appreciate what Andrew said earlier about improving what we have here first before we build new. Now, in regards to some of the public resistance, I noticed on the board over there that there are a lot of dots in the public resistance corner. I think when it comes to development projects and when you talk about incentives and ways to minimize the risk or lessen the risk for developers coming in, what that comes across to me as is basically an incentive program is a public investment. You're asking for public monies to be invested to help reduce the risk. So with that, you're going to have to involve the public in a very intentional and inclusive manner on the front end. So, I was aware and I tracked very closely the Five Corners situation that was referred to earlier, and also the Mystic Oral School situation, and some other situations too. And one thing I was struck particularly about the Five Corners situation was that building was actually approved for a 4-story development, and it was when the developer insisted on a 5th story where people started to kind of get a little riled up. contrast that to the Colonel Ledyard School, which I believe has already advanced further even now. That developer made it their point and their business to involve the community around that building. And when there was resistance to the initial design, they redesigned to accommodate for those concerns. So I think, that's what I'd like to hear is like, how do we, and there's been a lot of effort in this town to help resolve those issues and find ways to redo the process or restructure the process by which we offer incentives, which is a public investment, such that the public is on board on the front end, so that what we're advocating or what we're being asked to accept and invest in, we have a belief and confidence in. So I would just like to hear, as far as, your perspective, it sounds like you travel around a lot and you talk to a lot of communities. But what I'm not hearing from you, this is your 4th year here, you said?
Going on 4th, yeah.
Yeah, so what do you see in particular in this town that we should invest in? Because, the Trader Joe's thing and the Whole Foods thing, there's been a lot of groundswell here for that sort of, we want one of those here. And so how do we get one of those here? What sort of incentive package should we offer? I guess I'm looking for more specifics coming from you, a professional who's been doing this.
And, for the consideration of privacy for all the parties that are involved, a lot of the things that are being talked about tonight are happening in the background. I don't want to speak directly to one particular developer or one tenant or even one specific property. But what I can tell you, having worked in over 400 communities, is that the solution's almost always the same, and the solution is alleviate and, at worst case scenario, manage the risk. Now, the execution and implementation of that solution is the hard one, and that's where being able to get the public's buy-in enough where you can utilize things like tax incentives and even we've had communities before. Actually, we have a community in Southern California right now. The city itself owns 2 hotels and operates 2 hotels. And the most recent deal that we did with them was for Topgolf. And in that particular deal, they took a 18-hole municipal golf course. They cut it back down to 9 holes. They're ground leasing the property to Topgolf, and the city is constructing the structure. So the city is literally building the building and the structure for Topgolf on the city's land and leasing it back to them over the next 20 years. That's pretty extreme. And even I was like, y'all want to really do this? And they wanted it. They said, we don't want to see it go anywhere else. I was like, well, I get that. Because there is a chance that if they had not stepped in and done that, it would have gone right down the road to a better site, to a better, price for the property or whatever. But after they started stacking up the things they could do for them, it became more advantageous for Topgolf to be on this property versus the one they were looking at down the road. And so with that, anything's possible. If you told me today that the only thing y'all wanted was an 80-story office building, it could be done, but y'all have to pay for it. And so at the end of the day, I think all of these things that are being talked about tonight are really great ideas, and they're a part of the solution. But at the same time, I don't get to make these decisions. And something that we've talked internally about is the ideas of using things like incentives. But at the end of the day, y'all live here, y'all pay the taxes here, and y'all get to ultimately decide where you want your tax money to go and ultimately where you're going to shop. What I hope to do is to take what you guys give me and what the staff gives me and deliver that message all across the U.S. at the 18 trade shows that we go to each year. Now, when we have an interested party, if we're, from here to that door and making, the deal work, everything we're doing at that point is trying to figure out how do we get a little bit closer to that door? What could we do to move closer to getting that deal done? And that's the sort of expertise that we have as a company, but I still can't go and do all of that. If I told you, hey, for Trader Joe's, their performa looks pretty marginal, They're going to need at least another 5 to 10%. Somebody's got to make that up. So then you're either asking that developer, that property owner to make up for that, or take 10% less than what they were originally expecting to take, or you're going to have to make up that 10%. I'm just throwing random numbers out there because you mentioned specifics. I'm trying to give as much general specifics as I can give, but money has to come from somewhere. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to illustrate, is that if y'all can remove the barriers to entry for the market, they will come. But right now there are barriers. And a lot of it has to do, number one, with the market. They don't trust this market because people are going elsewhere to shop. And if they know that they've got your dollar one way or the other, then they don't see it as justified to spend capital in a market where they're already getting the money. Now, I'm fighting that and saying that, hey, I think you're still missing some people by doing that, by not being here. And so that's one of the solutions that we're implementing, at least on our end. I think the other thing is that even from like a planning and zoning perspective, the more simplistic, and again, going back to the path of least resistance, the less resistance they feel when they get here, the better chance is that they're going to be able to locate here. And so I'm not going to speak any more specifically about zoning, but at the same time, just understand we deal with a lot of communities, especially in California, with a lot of really complicated zoning restrictions, overlay districts, things like that. And it makes it really hard to do development in that particular state. And that's not even just one city, that's just statewide. And that's just because the status quo there is, we want these restrictions in place. But I think there's also a balance in between having your city or your town look the way that you want it to look and being non-business friendly.
I have about 5 people in the front that have raised their hands. Catherine has a question.
Let's do it.
Hi, I have one comment. I'd like to second the statements that were made about entertainment and things to do in the town. Over the last several years, we've lost some of those opportunities, particularly for young families with children. So I personally am hoping for that. And I have been appreciative of the comments, or in the survey that came from Parks and Rec, that asked us about having a community center with a swimming pool, that kind of thing. The question that I have is, I didn't hear you make any comments about the impact of online shopping.
And that's something that we get a lot when we do these. Obviously, it's had an impact. But I think it goes back to the fact that, like I said earlier, consumers are going to get the products and services that they want. That's finite. It's just where they're going to get them. I've done a lot of work for AutoZone as a consultant, and one of the things that they, for them, online shopping just never really hurt them because they have them so strategically placed where it's more convenient for you to stop by brick and mortar than it is to get online to Amazon or even their own website and order a product and wait for it for 3 days, because then if your serpentine belt breaks, you need a new serpentine belt. You're either going to be without air conditioning and power steering because you're waiting 3 days, or you're going to stop at that AutoZone right down the street and pick up a serpentine belt. So there's some things that online shopping is just not providing the customer, and that's where a lot of retailers right now are looking to capitalize. There was a report that I read, I think it was back in 2018, and obviously online shopping's just grown since then. But it was by Bain & Company, and it was the private equity report, and they were talking about online shopping, but not really what it was doing well, but what it was not doing so well. And they had like a high-low graph where they were showing by industry sector what the satisfaction, customer satisfaction of making a purchase was. And the one that had the greatest high and the greatest low was the beauty sector. So what that represented was, in that particular sector, people had either made the best purchase they've ever made online or potentially the worst, because they had a wide range of customer satisfaction in that sector. And so that just shows me that when ladies got online, they ordered makeup, it was either exactly what they wanted or it was not at all what they expected. And of course, as you all know, you couldn't send it back, no returns on makeup. So then it just left them feeling unsatisfied. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of growth in some of these industry sectors where online just can't really compete with it. people still need to walk in the store. They need to feel something. They need to see the texture. They need to make sure the color's right, the fit's right. A lot of clothing stores are doing really well right now because of this. But again, it's all evolving. It changes daily. I think online shopping has definitely impacted some of these things. Just the reason that, you know, something like Benny's is not around today, and even Sears is not around today. Because, you know, honestly, they can get it online and make that purchase a lot easier. So even consumers prefer the path of least resistance. And so that means that if the consumers are in charge here and they prefer the path of least resistance, that also needs to be the MO for the town. Go ahead.
Oh, you got it. I have a number of questions. We'll start at the top. So on one of your posters over there, you have a bullet point that says $68,000 of disposable income and no context. Could you please speak to that?
So with disposable income, that's basically after the things that we know you have to pay. So when you factor in things like your taxes or what we expect the average person, average household rather, to be able to be able to live off of, disposable income is what a lot of these retail businesses look at. Because we don't necessarily know at that point how you're going to spend it. You know, we can go back and look at historical data and see where it was spent, but at the same time, if you have $68,000 sitting in your pocket right now, it's really up to y'all where you're going to go and spend that. And some might drive down the road to a Whole Foods, and some might spend it right here, but that represents kind of the starting point for where there is income that can be spent at something like a retail establishment, a restaurant, you name it.
So that's supposed to indicate how much money the average Groton resident has to spend.
Average household.
Household in America, a household in Connecticut?
In Groton.
So in Groton, the average household in Groton.
And we track all these consumers. So these, instead of us looking at the town as a boundary, we track these individuals that are here. The people that might work at EB or work at Pfizer, or that were just driving down the street one day and decided to pop off into one of these stores down here in downtown Groton.
Okay, so I've heard a lot about folks talking about Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and on the RTM. I said on the RTM. We had actually asked that question several months ago, and Mr. Bronk here had told us that, frankly, Whole Foods won't come here because Groton's average income isn't high enough. And so when we keep talking about affordable housing, when we keep talking about all of these supposed high salary engineers working at EB, and I'll get to that, where is your solution to bringing those kinds of retailers that we want, but supposedly we don't have a high enough average income to actually attract them? Like, that's got to be part of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the puzzle, and frankly, you have to prove them wrong. And again, I think Whole Foods and Trader Joe's are slightly different clientele. I might get some debate on that, but they are slightly different clientele as they see it, and that's the part that I care about, is when I've got to talk to them about a market, I better know how they want to see it, not how I think it should be. But frankly, I think the way that you solve that is you got to show them otherwise. You got to show them, hey, even if we have $68,000 in disposable income, there's going to be enough of us that are going to go and patronize this store to make it worth your while to build a store in the first place. But there again, if they say, hey, we need at least this much store sales, somebody's got to make that guarantee and make them feel warm and fuzzy in order for them to pull the trigger on a deal like that. And that may mean that, hey, you know, we can take less revenue because we're paying in less rent. But then you've got to say to Mr. Developer, I can only pay you this much rent. Well, I need to make this much money. So then how do you offset what he expects in terms of return on investment versus like what Whole Foods or one of these grocers would expect in terms of their store sales? And so that's why we titled it Solving the Development Puzzle, because it really is a puzzle. If you can make ends meet on one end or the other, then they'll do it all day long. But if they get to the middle and say, none of this is making any financial sense, it's going to be really hard to get them here.
And so the next thing is kind of, I'm a millennial, right? I work at EB in a big old office, and my family bought a house here.
Right.
We have young children. We don't like hanging out in Groton because there's nothing for us to do, and I don't want to just leave my house to spend money. So what part of this puzzle is creating third spaces for me to go do my work from home, for me to just take my kids and hang out? Maybe we'll buy a coffee or an ice cream, but part of this development puzzle also has to be those third spaces where community is built and people aren't just existing to spend money.
Right. And as a millennial myself, I can definitely show that there is a lot of us and a lot of friends that I have that's experiential retail is the way that we shop. We don't go to a store because we just happen to get a coupon in the mail or we clipped a coupon. We go there because we want an experience. There's a development just down the street from me in Fort Worth where I've yet to ever go there and spend any less than 4 hours because I go there, I park once, and I go all around this development. I eat there, I go and shop, there's things to do, there's a pickleball court in the back part of it. And so that just goes to show what my generation, the generations after me love to do is to experience the retail, experience the development that they're in, placemaking, things like that go a long way with my generation and the generations after me. So you have to keep in mind it's not necessarily the product itself, it's just the environment that we're in. It's what we're feeling when we're there. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that here as well. And furthermore, yesterday we were in Boston for ICSC, which is one of our trade shows that we go to each year. And we had a meeting with a entertainment venue. And again, I'm not making any promises on that, but at the same time, like that's definitely on our radar and something that we're chasing. But it makes it really hard when we got two that just went out of business or that have gone out of business, because then we have to explain to them, oh, but you'll make it. It's a lofty, I guess message to send them is that, even though the last two didn't make it, we think you could. And they're looking at me thinking like, well, we've heard that before. We've seen that movie. And so that's where we're combating a lot of that. And so I think the first step is you've got to stop the bleed. You've got to stop letting all of this traffic go somewhere else and try to find a way in which to find the things that you want to do or could do right here.
Thank you. Councilor Rachel Franco, there was this slide that you had where the items that we're supposed to do as a town.
Yeah.
And my question is, I'm thinking possibly Paige Bronk, you could answer some of these, because I'm also hearing that there are developers that want to come here. They're knocking on the door, and there's property that's vacant, but some of the owners don't want to do anything with it. They're not willing to sell to them, or they're not willing to, they just want to lease, or they want it under their specifics, and so they're leaving. Or I'm hearing development's really hard sometimes in Groton because there is a lot of red tape, and sometimes it makes it hard to get through some. Although I know planning and zoning has gone through and redone their regulations, so it should be easier right now. And then we have Chris Regan, whose name's right on the window there. If you want to rent the place, to call him. So this is his plaza. So, like, what's going on? And I know, like, development, the deals take years to happen sometimes, and right when you're at the end and you think you got it, something happens and it falls through, and you have to start again, and then you got potentially years ahead of you again to do another development deal.
Story of my life.
So on these top 5, I mean, I know there's incentives. This whole area is a TIF district. The council has made it a TIF district, and but for whatever it is there, I understand all of that, but they're not knocking down the door for even those incentives either, right, to bring in development.
Well, and it kind of goes back to the fact, and the first thing I led with was that if you take nothing else from this room tonight, please know this takes time. And not just, I'm not trying to bias time, what I'm saying is that because something's changed today or recently, if someone's approached the town in the past and all of that red tape's been there, or that property owner said this or that, and it didn't lead to a deal. Some of these retailers work off of 3 and 5 year, development plans. And so then if that was their, encounter 5 years ago, they may say to themselves, oh, well, we've already investigated this market, we're on to the next ones. And it may not even be up for a debate, for the next 5 years. And so hopefully over the past 3 years, we've done our job and we've tried to undo some of that. And so if there was a perception or a notion that, hey, there's a lot of red tape in Groton, we've said, oh, but you need to take a look at it again because this has changed. And so we're doing that, but just know that we're undoing a lot of years of decline. And I think that's apparent with the population graph in there. If we've already lost say 10,000 people, and we're going to lose another 5 over the until 2050. That's a lot to try and undo. And it's the same for retail development as well, because at the end of the day, this Benny's didn't become vacant overnight. This shopping center didn't become empty overnight, but we're trying to fix it overnight, and that's tough. That's just really tough, and that's where even the little things go such a long way. If there is one thing that you could do to alleviate some risk, or to remove a little bit more red tape, or to even just make it enticing for them to come here. You know, that was something that we put in, we always do at the end of each year. We do like an action items and recommendations, and we discuss this with our clients. And one of the recommendations I have for one of our clients recently was hosting kind of a mixer for regional restaurateurs and bar owners. And so it wouldn't be open to the public, but it would be something where they would invite some local restaurants and some local bar owners to just come and hang out for an evening, and on the city's dime. And they love that idea, and that's something that we're putting together now. But at the end of the day, it's just, I don't know if that will lead to anything. There's no guarantees in this industry, but it certainly helps when they get some free food. It got y'all here tonight. It's some free food, a little bit of drink, you know, it really gets people in the room. And so that's where, I'm not even saying like big things are what we need to be doing. It's just the smallest thing can have a huge impact later on down the road. I think the important part to note is that what we do today may not even have an impact until 3 years from now. But we've got to start today for it to have an impact 3 years from now.
Hi, question about statistics, since I think your presentation says statistics and economics drives everything.
Right.
What community is similar to this community that had a catalytic development that lit the match for everything else?
It's really tough, especially for Groton, comparing it to other communities, because I think I asked Paige the first time I met him 3 times how many people worked at Electric Boat, because I just didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way that y'all have that many people at one industry. But it was true. And so I think that is a really unique thing that I haven't seen a lot of. There was a town that we worked with in South Alabama that was right next to Fort Rucker. And so they had a huge military presence, obviously a lot of DOD contractors there. There was just a lot of things going on down there as far as the government and the military. And that was somewhat similar. But I think it really just went back to, number one, in Alabama, they've got some pretty lax, state statutes that allow them to pretty much do whatever they want with public money. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying like that's pretty much what the law states. And so they did utilize that. It's called the 772 Act, and basically says that they can utilize public dollars for private development. And that's about as specific as it gets. But anyway, they did some 772 deals. But then they also had people out there marketing it all the time. And I think that's one thing that y'all have done that's really impressive. It's not every community seeing this as a priority. There's a lot of communities that we've come across where they're like, well, we like our town just the way it is. We don't want to change it. I'm like, well, that's definitely not a client for me, and that's not someone that I can potentially sell our services to. But at the same time, there's communities out there that are not hiring companies like ours to go and bring in more business because they're happy the ones that they got. And it sounds to me like y'all are not happy with the current outlay of businesses here, but that's what we're trying to change. I just want y'all to understand all the things that happen behind the scenes, even before a retailer makes it here to even see the community. And so sometimes that's a 3-year process just in and of itself. And so that's something, I think we're headed in a positive direction, but again, we're undoing decades of decline.
I have 3 people at a minimum. We're a little over the 7 o'clock. I want to respect people's time. I want to get through the questions as well, but I'm going to keep going along and trying to answer these questions as long as you want to stay.
Hi. My question's really quick. It's actually for the town representatives. So we're talking a lot about public funding to help move this along, and which of course equates to taxes. So years ago, when the governor became governor, he raised the sales tax with the stipulation that a percentage of that would come back to the towns. What happened to that money? What's it being spent on? Anybody know what I'm talking about? It went from 6% to 6.35, the sales tax. And the 0.35 was supposed to come back to the local communities. Initially with the stipulation to reduce property taxes and make it more affordable. Anybody? She knows?
So there were a lot of caveats put on that 0.35% in order to get it back. A lot of it had to do targeting more the larger cities and being able to recapture that money. It was not how it was sold, but absolutely, we know a lot of things about Ned Lamont that we didn't, a few years ago. But here's what I'll say. It is a large issue that I know that I've spoken to members of staff about. We don't get our tax money back that we should be getting off of our federal and state-owned properties. We usually get payment in lieu of taxes. It's a large chunk of money. We're not getting 100% of that back. That's where that money kind of would have come in. But yeah, I know that's how it was sold, but it's not how the sausage is made.
And back to the question he asked earlier is, for other towns that are similar to Groton, the sales tax situation here in and of itself is unique to us because we work in 30 states, and to my knowledge, I think Oregon and maybe Connecticut are the only two where the towns don't get any of the sales tax. I think that's pretty much how it works. And so I had to wrap my mind around that when I first came here. I was like, all right, so you're telling me like, if we bring a business to town, you're only going to get the ad valorem. You're not going to get the sales tax. Because I think I even asked Paige, I was like, well, what are you trying to do then? If you're not getting the tax benefit from it, what are you trying to do? He said, well, it's really quality of life. We're tired of having to go other places to get the things that we want and need. And I understood that. It's just, understand from my perspective, that's very, very unique. We don't deal with a lot of towns that don't get their sales tax right back in some form or fashion. And so that's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
I'm just going to weigh in really quickly. I just want to reaffirm that point. It was something that I noticed years ago. Groton is really great. We have Mystic. We have all this opportunity. I've lived in several states, great communities. I was shocked to learn that we didn't get any benefit to share on the sales tax. Hotel, motel, food, beverage, particularly with Mystic here.
No kidding.
100% of that stays with the state. I'll stop there, but that is uncommon. Next question.
Hi, Jill Rusk, RTM moderator. My question is, we have a lot of property owners who are great and trying to lease their property, trying to resell their property. Unfortunately, we have a couple of property owners who have very key properties that have no interest in selling, no interest in developing them, and they've been sitting on them for decades. Can you address that and how we can incentivize them to move on their properties?
Well, having worked in Groton for going on 4 years now, I probably even know the property owners that you mentioned. That's really tough because at the end of the day, and even kind of where y'all sit and even where Paige sits and where I sit, we don't exactly get to force somebody's hand, the whole like catch more flies with honey than with vinegar mantra. That's something that we live by every day because, we don't get to tell people what they are and aren't going to do. We're going to try and convince them. We're going to try and do the things that we can do best to get them to see that there's an opportunity that they're missing out on. But it's tough when someone's holding out on a property that is really, paramount for what we're trying to do, and that is development. What I have found, though, is that everybody has something that makes them tick, and it's not always money. It's not always, there's things that people want, and so that's where I'm not a psychologist by any means, but at the same time, we try to look past like just dollars and cents and think to ourselves, all right, well, what does this person really want in life? What could the town possibly do to move this person from where they are, which is I'm not ever going to sell, to here's my property, go and develop it. I'm not saying that we've got a secret sauce or a magic solution to that, but at the same time, we try to stop thinking about money at that point and think about, well, what's making this person motivated? And if that doesn't work, eventually we all die, and I hate to be so crass, but these people won't be on the earth forever, and as long as they don't leave it to their kids and they have the same thoughts that they did, we should be able to do something at some point. But again, y'all see why this process takes so long. I'm not saying we're over here waiting for people to die, but at the same time, if we were, that would potentially be a long time for some people. And so that's where, just bear with us and understand this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Hi. I have two observations and a question. One is your graph, which I'm really familiar with regard to retail rents and the dramatic decline, which makes it really tough for developers to build and be able to lease space at $12 a square foot.
Correct.
Which is where the market is today.
Correct.
Okay, so I make that observation. The second one is you really did not spend any time talking about the psychographics of the consumers in this particular marketplace, the demographics.
Right.
That has a huge impact.
Right.
And it may be worthwhile spending 5 minutes so that people understand that the demographics in Groton are aging.
Right.
An aging population, they don't spend money the way families, newly formed families do, people just out of college do. Their spending patterns are very different.
Right.
And that has a big impact right now in the town of Groton.
Yeah. Well, you know, on the psychographics, obviously we have that data, we track it over time, and I've seen it change. I've watched it change since we've been working here. And one thing to note there, even outside of just that, my immersion in the community, there is an aging population, and this is even conversations we've had with Electric Boat and Pfizer, is the fact that, you know, as people retire and people age out of their positions, it's my generation that's coming in there and replacing them at some level, and probably not even at their salary level, but, you know, we're the next step, you know, for them. They need workers. And so that's why I expect that particular data point to change even more drastically over the next probably 5 to 10 years because of the aging out of the population. Right. And it all goes back to the fact that we don't own our own houses, which I do, but, you know, and others do as well, but we're not the majority. We also don't have IRAs and 401ks. We haven't even thought about retirement, probably can't even spell retirement. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that we are not generating wealth, and that's something that I'm not getting on my soapbox today, but my generation and the generations after me are not generating wealth. We spent every last dollar that we get. And sometimes not even on things that we probably should. And so that's why, you know, it's not good for the long term as far as the, I guess, society goes, but in terms of consumer spending, we're great customers. All we know how to do is spend money, and hopefully make enough to spend. So that's where I think with psychographics, we'll see that change even more rapidly. But there again, got to have a place to live. And so that's where removing some of those barriers. Multifamily is a great asset class. It's a guaranteed amount of money, and as things are going more towards renting versus buying, there's going to be even more demand. And so it's up to Groton to decide, all right, you know, are we going to keep up with our supply? Or are we going to let it get built in New London, and then even people working at EB can't afford it because, you know, they're filling it up at X amount of money. If I own that property, I'd probably do the same thing because that's more money for the property owner.
Yes, I think let's say that a Trader Joe's came to town and occupied this space right here. That would be nice, but I don't think it's going to make much of a dent in our improvement in quality of life. I've lived in Groton for 27 years, and a long time ago, I saw a plan for this area right here.
I was on that committee.
Yeah, there was going to be.
We worked hard on it with Heather Summers.
Yep.
We had a plan.
Yes, there was going to be a government building as kind of as an anchor. Said there's too much parking lot here. We don't need that. We're going to have green space. We need to, it has to be walkable. I don't drive here because I have to get in a car and then get in the car and then get in the car. So there's, you know, it was going to be walkable. They were going to be able to have a bridge across the busy street so that you could walk from one place to another, walk within the place, and more green. I mean, and all of this has been planned. I would also think people would really like to see bike paths or bike lanes, and to make so we don't have to be so dependent on a car. And I also things like energy efficiency. I've been other places where there's some covered areas of the parking lot with solar on top of it. People are really going after those parking places. And, you know, in the summer, your car doesn't get hot. In the winter, it doesn't get snow. So those are all things that make the place more livable and more attractive. This is just plain, this whole area is just ugly. It's no fun to come here. So, and I went, I'm a member of the Acoustical Society of America, and we had a meeting in New York, and I spent a day studying soundscapes. And that was really fascinating. And we also collected some data for one of the researchers there and went to different spots and did ratings. And what we found was that the ratings where people liked it the best, there were two things that made a difference. And one was a separation between you and a car. You can see the cars, but there has to be some kind of separation, a lower wall, a bush, something. And the other thing was the sound of birds. People felt more comfortable, more relaxed, happier. So, a little separation from the cars, it's the sound of nature, and people are happy and relaxed. So these are the kinds of things I think that would make this town more attractive to more people. And I think, we talk about the people at EB, they talk Pfizer and a large portion of the Navy. I mean, there are a lot of smart people there. And I think smart people will pay attention to smart growth. Not just another store, but just like the whole thing, the whole community. What are our goals? I don't see goals about where we're going as a community with this.
Well, please keep in mind, I don't get to determine any of that. At the end of the day, what our company does is we go and hopefully attract retailers to come into the communities in which we work. It's up to y'all to decide what you want the community to look like and sound like and feel like when you're in it. I do think that adding amenities, retail amenities to the community and other places to eat and shop definitely adds a value to the community. It adds things to do and it encourages others to go and check out a community because there are things to do. But it's really up to y'all to decide what you want the community to look like. Now, I will warn you, some of the things that we've seen in the past, as you decide these things, potentially add costs. And I hate to make it all about numbers here, but you got to keep in mind, if you decided out there we need a pedestrian bridge going across the road, someone's got to build it and pay for it. And so if the community wants to make that their priority, then they can go and ultimately pay for it. But I can't just sit down with a developer in New York and say, hey, the community wants a bridge here, you got to go and pay for it. Because the developer is going to say to me, nah, I'm not doing that, I'm going somewhere else. So just keep in mind, there's a balance between having your community look the way that you want it to look and feel the way that you want it to feel, and what the developer is willing to do. Because if they're not willing to do it, and if the retailer is not willing to go along with the rents that they're going to have to charge them in order for them to do it, it's never going to work. Now, the other question I would have for that, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but what happened in 2002 when that plan was drafted and never got, finalized or adopted? And so with that, that's been over 20 years now. And so that's where, just keep in mind, even if in 2002 was where you decided, hey, we want this to look different, we want it to look better, and here we are 20 years later, and it looks worse, what happened there? And that's where I haven't been around that long. I was still in middle school at the time, but I would wonder, why did it go the opposite direction? Why didn't it go the positive direction?
I think we're down to one last question, which I'm going to jump on in a second, but I'm going to make a quick comment. Let me just finish this. Here, have the microphone.
Okay. All right.
I got it.
Okay. So I was on this committee to redevelop down here with Heather Summers, our state senator, years ago when I was on the council. And there was 3 women on the committee. The men never showed up. We really wanted,
don't hold that against me.
which is my message to you. The people who do the most shopping are the women. And I was recently down here with one of our best real estate developers in town, and I said, how's the real estate business? She said, terrible. I said, why? And she pointed to this neighborhood. She said, I can't get anybody here because there's no shop. They can't shop. and it's the women who want to shop. So usually how I've noticed, so I've been here for 23 years, it's the men who make all the decisions. And you say things, oh, well, we can't spend the money on a little extra something beautiful that would actually appeal to the women because it's going to cost too much money. But it's also going to cost you all the women shoppers. So I really wish you would involve more of the women in this town into the actual design. And the only final thing I will say, the one great development I worked on was with, in fact, Tim Bates, who's sitting right here. I don't know if you remember the Great Brook and Joan Smith. We did the Great Brook development where we insisted on more greenery and things like that. We even had little sidewalks for the salamanders to get back and forth to their ponds. Everybody loves living there because there's that little extra touch. And I really beg you to not try to save money. I mean, I think the town would be happy to give you money if we had a guarantee that you would spend it where we want it to be spent. We would give you the tax breaks to make it nicer so that the people would come and everybody would be happy.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Last quick comment.
Yep. Just I did talk with Paige briefly about the enterprise zone. There was an enterprise zone in Groton, and it covered quite a few districts, all the way, I think, into the city district. That needs to be looked at, and I don't know if you have looked at that, but there are tax incentives. Okay, so tax incentives for refurbishing and new buildings, new construction. The owner of this building, I think it's Joyce, and I think she should be approached. And I also think that they should offer some type of tax incentive to certain retailers to get some movement. It's the only way it's going to work because I understand she doesn't want to invest. It's going to benefit her or whoever the building is under, them, and it's also going to benefit the community. The other quick thing is I believe, and I would strongly suggest, that everyone in this room get a letter. If you haven't done your online surveys, do that. Get a letter to this department and you about what direction you want to go in. If you have to do a petition, wherever your village district is. I'm District 4 now. It's the largest district population-wise in the town. So I want to see, I bought a house over here because I needed a house, and I like it here. I want to stay in Groton, but I want to stay in Groton that's going to be nice. I don't want it to be the grotto. I want it to be Groton. Okay.
Thanks. I think we're going to close it here. I'll give Casey the last word.
Yeah, like I said earlier, please understand this takes time. If it didn't, I wouldn't have a job. If Paige could snap his fingers and something show up, I wouldn't have a job. And I guess thank God it's a slow process because of that, it requires a lot of diligence and even sometimes us investigating information that we don't have or know. But at the same time, if you stay on a path leading somewhere positive, if it has nothing to do with retail, if it just ends up being we need more housing or we want bridges going across roads, if you stay diligent, you will get that. And so that's something, I'm not trying to put all this back on y'all, but at the same time, decide what it is that you want and pursue that. But don't get 2 years down the road and give up or let some barrier, something happen to stop you from doing it. I started this company 8 years ago after leaving another company. I'd never ran a business a day in my life, and thank God it worked out. But at the same time, there was a lot of hard days where I think the only thing that got me through is I just didn't give up. And so as a town, I think you can truly see all the things that you are talking about here today, but don't get halfway there and say, well, this is just too hard or this just takes too long and give up. Understand that it's tough. It's the reason I have a job, but it's tough.
Thank you, Casey. Also, I want to thank you guys for sticking it out and coming here tonight. I just want to make one other comment as I was hearing all of this. The ideas need to be there. In some ways, the ideas are the simplest. I'm both a community planner and an economic developer. I can tell you in my 30 plus years, I've seen a lot of plans, a lot of designs and this idea, this concept. The difficult part is the implementation. And to believe that someone else is going to do it will lead you to where we're at. As we started, it takes time. Maybe we've degraded over time. Well, it's going to take some time to get out of that. The town has to be a partner in it. I'm not saying that we're going to build this, but I'm not recommending a recipe, but we have to come forward, put out a red carpet, whether it's incentives, business friendliness. We have to embrace that because we're not paying for it. The private investor is paying for it. I'm not saying that we want to accept something that's inferior. We do not. We want to hold that standard high. But again, we're not financing it and we're not paying for it. We're not building it. Someone else is. So it's a partnership. I would leave you with that. With Groton's declining population, we have a declining commercial base, and the demographics and the vibrancy are directly correlated. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you all.